podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
Welcome back to the Love Tennis podcast with me, James Gray of the iNewspaper and iNews.co.uk. I've got with me, of course, George Belshaw, the tennis writer, and our resident coach, Calvin Betton. And I want to start by asking you to leave us a 5-star rating and a review if you think we're worth it. If we're not worth it, drop us an email, lovetennispod@gmail.com. We'd love to hear some constructive criticism, something that we can work on over the next couple of weeks and make this podcast better for you. Because it's not about us, it's about you. I also wanted to say that there is an opportunity arisen to sponsor the podcast. You may remember during Wimbledon we had Matchpoint Tennis Championships, the fine Xbox game, sponsoring the podcast. It allowed us to do a lot more podcasting. What I would say, if you're considering sponsoring the podcast, it's cheaper than you think. So if you've got a company or a project or maybe another podcast that you want to promote to our listeners, then please do get in touch. Email us at lovetennispod@gmail.com. We'll happily listen to any offers. I mean, not any offers, like George has expensive taste and we have to keep him in fresh threads. So, I'm sure if you buy him a couple of nice shirts, that'll probably cover it. We've got loads coming up to talk about today. Nick Kyrgios has won 2 titles this week. We've also got wins for Daniil Medvedev, Daria Kasatkina, and we've also got news from Toronto as well as other places. Some interesting chat from Maria Sakkari. We'll also talk about second serves. We'll talk about Carlos Alcaraz, and we'll talk about those hardcore practice sessions. And finally, if we've got time, Calvin's favourite topic, padel. Padel. In Spain they call it padel, but we'll argue about how to pronounce it shortly, because as I say, Calvin's absolutely wild about it. But there is only one man to start with, to be quite honest, this week. It is, of course, Nick Kyrgios. He became the first man to win both the singles and doubles title in Washington in the same year. He and Jack Sock beat Dodik and Krajicek in the final 7-5, 6-4. But in the singles, which is the title, let's face it, everyone cares about, he beat Yoshihito Nishioka, a man he's known since they were 14 years old. Yoshi beat him 6-4, 6-3 to claim the title for the second time. He won it back in 2019, which was the last title he won, in fact. He's up to 7 career titles now. Calvin, I've got 2 Georges on my screen and they're both muted, so I'll maybe start with you. This wasn't the most impressive run of victories. To remind you, he beat Marcus Giron, Tommy Paul, Riley Opelka, Francis Tiafoe and Mikael Ymer before facing Nishioka in the final, but wins are wins, and you can't buy confidence, can you? So it's useful to pick that title up a couple of weeks out from the US.
Yeah, it's something he's not done for a while, winning titles. Like you say, I mean, you'd have made him heavy favourite in every one of those matches, I would think. You could argue, ranking-wise, he might not be massive favourite, but he's underranked, let's face it. And none of those are the type of player, either in terms of quality or stylistically, that give him trouble, usually. So, yeah, good achievement for him. I'd hope he follows it up. I doubt he will.
You say he's underranked there, Calvin. I mean, I think he would be top 10 in the race if the Wimbledon points had counted. Do you think he is a top 10 player right now? What would you say is his actual ranking? I think we looked at the yellow, didn't we, the other week, and he was about 6 or 7 in the world. But what's your personal perception?
His ceiling is definitely top 10. My ceiling's maybe higher. And his sort of 7, 8 out of 10 is top 10. But that's not how you get in the top 10. You get in the top 10 by winning matches most weeks of the year. And he doesn't play most weeks of the year. So
do you think that's a fair? I mean, we talk a lot about the tennis ranking system and we say it's good because it's usually pretty reflective of who's the best in the world. Is it right that it's just your last 12 months? I saw people this week talking about having it more weighted towards more recent results and creating like a sliding scale. I mean, is it right at the moment the way it is, Calvin?
I think so. Yeah, you're never going to get a perfect one, and look, you can't go into the top 10 in the world if you've barely won a match all year. Then you play a dream week, and then suddenly that's. Now I think the 12-month rolling thing it's not perfect, but neither is anything. The only other way you can do it, and a way of looking at it, is the UTR. But I don't know what that probably gives you a fair assessment of anything of who the actual best top 10 players in the world are. But you can't base it on that because that doesn't take into account how far you got on tournaments. In tournaments, it just based on who you beat and the scorelines that you beat them and that kind of thing. I'd be interested to know, James, if you can look it up. Where does Kyrgios rank in the UTR?
I'm pretty sure that might have been what I was referring to be honest. The last rankings I checked, and he was quite high up. But I know there is an ELL one as well. I was just gonna say while James looks that up and puts his research face on, there is actually another school of thought in the rankings which I personally disagree with, but I will raise it just for to see if I'm alone in not agreeing with this. But it's often been supported by people like Nadal that they'd like a 2-year ranking system where results last longer. Do you see any merit in that? I think I might be right in saying Gauff has something like that, possibly.
Can't see why that would make much difference to a 1-year one. The only way it can make a difference is if there's injuries, but then you get protected rankings anyway. But I think why.
That is his point.
Just look from 2 years ago. 2 years ago now, we were still in the throes of COVID. Like, why should results from that long ago, even if you go, say, just before COVID came, so February 2000, that's a long time ago. I don't see why those results should be counted towards a ranking.
Well, February 2000 would, of course, be a 22-year ranking system, Calvin, which I don't think we have.
2020, sorry.
That's actually something that we haven't talked about. Maybe we should discuss it. A 22-year ranking system.
But that's the thing. No, we joke about that, but that's the thing, isn't it? Like, what if you're going to do it on a rolling basis? Well, I don't get why a 2-year would be any more helpful than a 1-year. If you're going to do it anything, I'd say I'd be more inclined to do it like James says and have it weighted towards more recent, but 2 years and it's nonsense.
Well, I was going to say that I think that some people would push for a kind of weighted, so almost like half the points from 2 years ago and then the full points kind of the actual current year. That's kind of, so I suppose it is a little bit like James's, but actually extending the window out further, which I can see some merit for in an individual sport given injuries and stuff. I know you're saying protected ranking there, Calvin, but it's stuff like seedings you don't get, isn't it? Slams and stuff. Someone like Team could perhaps benefit from that.
We could discuss this. We can discuss this all out. Team shouldn't be in the top 50 in the world at the minute. There's no like you can't know. He's been he's played quite a few matches now, and what benefit would we have from Dominic Thiem currently being if he'd gone the 2-year thing, he'd currently be seeded, right? So he's going to go into he's going to mess the US Open draw up because he'll be seeded.
So I think he would argue, well, he probably wouldn't argue, I'm not sure if he does support the system, but someone may argue that I've earned that seeding and something's been taken away from me via injury. Yeah, but it's not his fault. He kind of had a long injury, I suppose, would be the argument.
That's the way
I
the
don't agree with this,
goes.
by the way, but
it's the way this. But yeah, look. What I'd say to any of this: look at the top 100 rank. Look at the top 100 tennis players in the world. How many can you say the rank? That's wrong. You probably get Nick Kyrgios because Nick Kyrgios barely ever plays. The ranking. Nick Kyrgios is unranked, not because of anything to do with the ranking system. Sorry, he's underranked, not because anything to do with the ranking system, because he never plays tennis.
I'll tell you who probably was the person who you would say until recently was probably the person who didn't belong in the top 100 was Roger Federer. So he was hanging on to points for years.
He doesn't have a singles ranking now, Roger Federer. Just to kind of fill you in on the UTR and that kind of thing, the Universal Tennis Rating, Nick Kyrgios is ranked 6th in the world, ahead of Taylor Fritz, Zverev, Sinner and Monfils, who's 10th in that. And the ELO, which for people who don't know, uses the kind of chess-style head-to-head rankings that Jeff Sackman puts together for tennisabstract.com. That has Kyrgios 10th in the world, just behind Ruud. Daniil Medvedev's 8th in that, which I think is quite interesting, but I assume that's obviously because he's not played much over the last 3 months. So
it's quite interesting. I mean, obviously, Wimbledon, the points didn't agree, but in every ranking system, he'd actually be top 10 then, right now, if those Wimbledon points hadn't vanished.
I'll say this. I'll say this on that because I know it was discussed a little bit in the group earlier on. We can, and I know a few people, other people are saying, "Oh, if ranking points had counted, it'd been this." There was a reason why ranking points didn't count. Let's be straight about that. It wasn't like a freak occurrence. Daniil Medvedev's the best tennis player in the world. He wasn't in there. Andrei Rublev's the 7th best tennis player in the world. He wasn't allowed to be in there. And like it or not, we've already discussed whether it should have been or shouldn't have been. That's why there were no ranking systems. You can make a very strong argument that if Daniil Medvedev was in the draw and if Andrei Rublev was in the draw, that the draw changes and Nick Kyrgios could have played one of those and he wouldn't have beaten Daniil Medvedev.
Yeah, I think that's a very, very good point.
That's a fair point, to be fair.
It's hard to argue with, which is frustrating. I think we might actually be unanimously in agreement with Calvin, which is a horrendous state of affairs.
Another question to pose today, seeing as I'm in a quizzical mood, clearly. What do we think Kyrgios's doubles ranking should be? Because he seems to just be tearing it up in there.
Well, can I just query what his doubles ranking currently is? I
think he's nearly top 20, isn't he?
He must be. Yeah, he is literally 20th in the doubles rankings, or at least he will be next week because he's going to go up 2. I mean, the thing is, right? He's won 2 titles, okay, in Atlanta and Washington. He won Atlanta with Thanasi Kokkinakis, who's a very good doubles player, and let's face it, they won the Australian Open. They're probably a top 10 doubles pair, so you'd say, well, that's reasonable. But then he did win Washington with Jack Sock, who is a specialist doubles player, who is and plays the right way to play with Nick Kyrgios, and is one of the best doubles players in the world. And with the greatest of respect, they won 3 matches, and it wasn't a very good draw. And the pair they beat 10-6 in a Champions tiebreak. Like, Calvin, I'm sure will agree with this. Doubles is a really bloody close game. Like with the scoring system as it is at the moment, like if you're going to take matches to Champions tiebreaks, I don't see those matches are 55-45 half the time, aren't they?
They're very much that, and one of the players I coach, Henry, they lost the match second round in Lexington last week, 11-9 in the Champions tiebreak. And they were 9-6 up in the Champions tiebreak. And on the face of that, you think, well, 9-6 up, you should get it done. And as it turns out, 9-6 with the other team to hit 2 serves. They've hit 2 aces and then return clean winner, just had a swing at a return, straight clean winner, and suddenly 9-all. And these things, it's the thing with doubles is it's very much a lottery. And I said to the lads the other day, because they were a bit down about it, and I said, look, we had a good summer, talking like boxing analogy there, they had a good summer and they won a lot of those close matches over the summer, but you tend not to remember them when you win them. There's a lot of tie breaks won, a lot of close tie breaks won, and that's the way doubles goes. It really is.
I remember Murray was really good on doubles when he was first coming back, wasn't he? Because in singles you play the same shot over and over again, and you're going to win the point 9 times out of 10 typically, whereas doubles you play the same shot twice and it's 50-50 depending on whether the bloke on the other side's bolted or not, so it really is harder to kind of weigh up.
Doubles there's a lot weighted on. I think it's similar to poker, really, in that poker is not a game of luck, and it's not entirely a game of luck, it's not entirely a game of skill. That there's a bit of both comes into it. And the thing with doubles is a lot of the time, so I want to say a match point, you're going to go and the server will go, I'm going to serve wide and we're going to stay, or I'm going to serve T and we're going to cross. And a lot of the returner doesn't know what's happening, so the returner will decide what he's going to do. And if he decides to return purely on guessing, or it might be based on a bit of information that they've had, if they decide to turn line and the server's partner stays, he's got to put away volley. And if he doesn't stay, it's a winner. So there's so many variables that can just depend randomly on luck.
The interesting thing then, bringing this back to Kyrgios, is actually probably the one shot in doubles that's got the least variables on is the serve, and he's got a freakishly good serve, doesn't it? If you can take that luck out by just acing people all the time as he seems to.
Yeah, and I don't want to give. I don't think there'll be any coaches listening, but I don't want to give too much away on how we plan. There is a double system where if you serve in certain places, you would decide to stay. And if you hit your spot on your serve, it's pretty difficult to get. I'll give one away. if you serve T on the juice, and you hit the spot on it, and it's a decent serve, it's pretty difficult to go down the line on it, to go back at where the service partner is. So then the service partner would generally cross, because most of the time the return is going to go back on the sort of an inside out backhand, if you know what I mean. Because if you hit the spot on it, it's a good serve. You can't get it to go the other way. A returner can't do that. So having someone like Kyrgios who hits his spots exceptionally well, and that's the big thing about Kyrgios' serve. It's not even the pace; he hits spots so well, and that's why he's a very, very good doubles player. He can hit spots on the serve.
And I suppose as well he has to, and without having really any specialist knowledge, but he has to play with certain types of doubles players, right? Like him and Tanasi always talk about, look, mate, you don't know how to play serve and volley. And it's like, well, most doubles players do play serve and volley, but
not true, James. Not true. Currently, 50% of the top 100 doubles players serve and stay back.
Really?
Yeah, that's changed.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's going up. That's rising.
How much is that to do with Louis Kaye? And I want the answer according to Louis Kaye and the answer according to everyone else.
It's not to do with Louis. Because most of the British guys do actually serve and volley. Yeah. It's more just the way that the game's progressing. But most of the British, I don't think we've actually got anybody who serves and stays back on anything other than clay. On clay, a fair few of them would serve and stay back. Look, you've got something like we've got to say there is Kokonakis is a very good doubles player. It's generally still considered that if he's interested, Jack Sock is still the best doubles player in the world. Like that is. That's not a wide shout to say that, and I know I've heard it numerous times over the summer. The thing is, not sure how much he cares about tennis. I'm not sure how much he cares about doubles tennis.
Yeah, that does seem reasonable. He is currently ranked 41 in the world, by the way, and coming up for 30. So, George, you had something to say.
In terms of this trend of people staying back in doubles, Calvin, you say it's about 50% now. What's that changed from over the last, say, 20 years or before that?
I'd say it's probably gone up 5% a year for the last 20 years.
All right, why?
No, not that. Sorry, no.
I was doing some maths there and being like, wow.
No, I would say. No, I know what I was trying to say there, and I've just completely got that wrong.
Fudge the numbers.
I would say that 20 years ago it would be 10%.
Yeah.
And it's probably gone up proportionally at the same percentage, whatever that is, each year.
And why? What's sparked it?
I think more like there's one thing. It's like just moving away from the norms. A lot of players, players tended to serve and volley, and a few players like Marc Lopez was one of the first ones, a Spanish guy who was very, very good at doubles, and then he served and stayed back. And I think then a few players looked at it. And then also now there's this doesn't get said here. There's also a lot of singles players who start playing doubles in recent years. Not necessarily the top players, but the very top, although there are some. Zverev plays a lot. Rublev plays a lot. Hanchinov plays a lot. Tsitsipas plays a lot, usually with the brother. But a lot of those guys play and they just feel better. They feel, look, those singles guys, they feel my ground strokes are better than anybody's in doubles, and they're better than anybody's doubles in volleys in doubles. So they're going to do that. And
then you add in the match court practice time, and it's like, well, I might as well play 2 rounds and pick up a few extra quid, and it all kind of adds up.
One final hypothetical. If say Nadal or Djokovic or Federer or Murray, they decided they wanted to commit their career to playing doubles right now, do you think they could be as good at doubles as Kyrgios is? Would they be world number one sort of thing in doubles as well?
Yeah, all day long. Yeah.
Which of them has the high? Like, is it just as simple as Djokovic is the best player of them, and therefore he would be the best doubles player? Or
he's often considered the worst, isn't he? That's
he's they say that, but he's very good. It's just look. You can never discount ball striking. That's something that the parameter. If you play proper doubles, then the parameters of the court changes, and a lot of Louis Kaye's doubles system is based on playing singles players at doubles, and that's why it works a lot.
Louis Kaye, for people who don't know, is the kind of head of doubles in Britain, and is kind of given most of the responsibility for creating a bit of a factory line of great doubles players in Britain. But yes, sorry, Calvin.
Yeah. So in terms of, I wouldn't say Djokovic would necessarily be the worst. I'd probably say Nadal might be the best because he's probably got the most all-round. Federer, it's tough to argue that Federer would be the best. It'd be tough to argue against Federer being the best. But then he is, 40 years old now. Murray would probably be the best.
What he won today?
I'd say Murray would probably be the best of the lot.
I was thinking Murray seems like the sort of obvious choice, like in terms of touch. Although I always say Nadal's a massively underrated volleyer, and he is a really good volleyer, and he's left-handed, which I feel like your advantage of being left-handed in doubles is greater. Is that fair?
Not necessarily, no. I mean, that's one thing that has changed over the last 20 years, that the left-handed tends to play on the juice more now. It was always, 20 years ago, you'd always get the left-hander played on the ad. But the reason the left-hander plays on juice is because then you get both forehands up the middle of the court. Because it's two. If you play it the other way, then you've got two backhands up the middle. It's always therefore a safer place to volley up the middle. Whereas now, if you're coming in on a volley, you want to be keeping it away from forehands. So, yeah, that's one of the things that changed. The other thing that's mainly changed is that I remember 20 years ago, it was generally accepted that the best doubles players in the world were the best returners, with the possible exception of Agassi. But that's not necessarily the case anymore now.
Right. Interesting.
Yeah.
Am I right in saying that Mark Lopez you mentioned, who was a very good doubles player, is that the same Mark Lopez who now coaches Rafa, or is part of Rafa Nadal's coaching team?
I think Nadal won an Olympic gold medal with him.
Right,
I did,
okay.
yeah.
I've seen a lot of Mark Lopez hit this summer then. Mark Lopez. He's and I've had a lot of people, because Nadal did during Wimbledon quite a lot of hitting sessions on match courts, which he often does. Lots of people just being like, "Oh, who's this guy he's hitting with? He's beautiful." And in fairness, Mark Lopez is a good-looking lad.
Are all the tennis Lopez's glorious? Then is that just a thing? If you're Lopez and play tennis, you have to be automatically.
Can you think of a bad-looking Lopez who plays tennis? I mean, I don't know. I don't really get the Feliciano Lopez thing. I'm not a Feliciano Lopez guy. I don't think he's that Deliciano. But just personal opinion, isn't it? Personal preference.
Yeah.
Probably should try and get back to talking about tennis. This is the Love Tennis podcast, but it's more Love Tennis rather than tennis and love. Trying to get back to talking some. The thing with Kyrgios winning in Washington that is really most significant of all the things that we've talked about is it means he'll almost certainly be seeded for the US Open. Not a high seed. He's up to 33 in the world. But he is, of course, playing Montreal, so he may pick up more points there as well. But he will be seeded thanks to the points that he's picked up. George, how big is that for any designs he might have on a US Open title, or does it not matter?
Yeah, I think we had this conversation from the other way around before. It looked like he wasn't going to be seeded, and I was kind of like, well, I don't think it matters so much for this US Open when we're not sure where Djokovic is going to be there. Well, I guess we're quite sure he's not going to be there at the current state of play. We don't know where Nadal is physically. It does feel like there's a little bit more of a mishmash with the rankings. So, but that said, there's absolutely no harm in being seeded, and it'll be good news for Kyrgios to avoid a seeded in the first 3 rounds. I actually think, though, to be honest, the people who are seeded will be more relieved that he has joined them rather than the other way around, because he's a nightmare first round.
Yeah, he now effectively is sweating the draw in terms of who his third round opponent will be, because obviously he'll be in that bottom bracket of, I think it's 24 to 32, where, I mean, for people who don't understand seedings or draws in depth at Grand Slams, they are effectively rigged so that if you're the number 1 seed, you're guaranteed in the third round to be slated against, at best, I think, the number 20. It might even be the number 28 seed. I think that those 4 players always go in the line that corresponds with the top 4 seeds. It's a 29 seed. Yeah. So Kyrgios, I mean, realistically, we could end up probably not that unlikely to get Kyrgios Medvedev round 3, which would be a hell of a matchup. Speaking of Daniil Medvedev, he picked up a title this week in Los Cabos. He beat one Cam Norrie, no less, in the Los Cabos Open to pick up a trophy that looked quite a lot like sort of 2002 World Cup football. for fans of the Seoul and Japan World Cup. He beat Norrie 7-5, 6-love, a pretty comprehensive result after what actually had been a pretty good week for the Brit. We'll come on to how he went, but we'll start with Medvedev because he's, of course, the world number one, and I suppose, George, especially on the strength of that, the favourite for the US Open, assuming Djokovic isn't going to be there, which we almost certainly think he won't be.
Yeah, I think he is the favourite. The caveat for him is Nadal still. I think he's the player I worry most about him in terms of a matchup at the US Open. I think there's still a bit of a lingering doubt, probably is a fair thing, when he knows how hard it is to put Nadal away and has really, that's gone very badly wrong for him a few times. So I think there's a bit of a mental battle there. But if you look at the field as a whole, without Djokovic, you'd be surprised if Medvedev wasn't at least a semi-finalist and probably a finalist as a minimum for this tournament. And you've said it before, time and time again, there's not many players with the tools capable of beating Medvedev on a US Open hardcourt. It really feeds into his game kind of perfectly, that slightly slower hardcourt than the Australian Open. So, yeah, he's going to be very, very tough to beat. And let's be honest, he's bounced back quite well from that. It was a hernia, wasn't it, earlier this year? He's come back. He's had a couple of grass finals. Obviously didn't play Wimbledon, but he's kind of just feels like he's got back into a decent groove and got that air of invincibility about him again. So, yeah, I think he's definitely the one to beat.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about people in finals a lot. And, Medvedev got to 2 finals on the grass. He lost to Tim van Richthoven, he lost to Hubert Hurkacz, both quite comprehensively. And I don't think we ever said, although maybe we should have done, but because there's so much other stuff going on, you're kind of not thinking about it. I don't think we ever said, Medvedev got a bit of a thing about finals? Because, he's obviously now lost one very high-profile one from a fairly significant position, and then also lost those 2 finals in a row. I don't know, maybe there's not lots to read into it. But anyway, to come into this one, and I did point out earlier that Nick Kyrgios beat some fairly mediocre opponents to win his title. Daniil Medvedev beat Rinky Hijikata, Ricardus Berankis, Miomir Kecmanovic and Cam Norrie, which, I don't know, in terms of 250 titles, you're kind of splitting hairs, but...
It's probably a bit of a moment, actually, for me to say, since we're looking at people's draws, that Nishioka's had by far the best men's week in terms of opponents beaten. He obviously lost to Kyrgios, but he had Dimonor, Evans, Rublev, Khachanov, Jensen Brooksby as his run. I mean, that's
who is that he beat in the first round there, George?
Jensen Brooksby.
I'm pretty sure you just called him Jensen Brooksby. I didn't realise that he was now Dutch. Jensen Brooksby might be my new favourite nickname for a player. It is worth pointing out, actually, Yoshihito Nishioka is someone who I think I'm not saying he's become a bit of a meme, but he's just like the absolute... I mean, Andy Murray draws him like once a week as far as I can tell, but he is just the classic first round opponent for like a high profile player, because he's always been ranked kind of between 50 and 100 in the world, so he's always in the main draw, he's never seeded, and I think we always go, that'll be like, it might be quite a long match, but he's never going to win any of them. I mean, we're not I don't want to be patronising, but, the reality is he's beaten 3 top 10 players in his life, and one of them was this week. Is he in a position for a breakthrough? I mean, he's 26. I don't know. It just... Maybe I'm reading too much into it.
Probably, not a breakthrough in terms of he'll go hurtling up the rankings, but he's, I don't know where he's gone up to this week or not at all. You can probably somewhere in the 40s. I would say what you're going to get from him. He's a player who's going to get back and forth on the court. He's kind of like a worse Djokovic in that sense. He's makes life.
He's
hard
also left-handed.
He is also left-handed. But for what he's got, he lacks that serious weapon, I think, to really trouble the top players. And this was a good week for him, let's be honest. I mean, the caliber of players he's beaten, like a Dimonor, for example, I would say is a better version of Nishioka, and obviously right-handed. But, he's not going to trouble the best in the game. Let's be honest, he's not going to beat Daniil Medvedev at the US Open. That'll be a good clip we can use if that does happen. It also, in terms of runs this week, and seeing as it is Roger Federer's birthday today, Cam Norrie beat two players who share a birthday with Roger Federer.
I mean, that's a quiz question I neither know nor want to know the answer to. In some
I
ways.
think you do know the answer, because one of them we've watched together before.
Okay, so the GOAT, obviously.
The GOAT, Tseng.
Yeah, Tseng.
The other one is
it
Felix?
Right, okay,
Yeah.
Very good. I mean, that's to be honest, I was going to talk about that match because that's quite a significant win for Cam Norrie. You know, he hasn't got a massive list of big wins over top 10 players, or even top 20 players for that matter. I think he's probably only got 3 or 4 of note against top 20 players. Calvin, I feel like that is what's going to make or break our opinion of Cam Norrie over the next 12 months or so is, you know, we've always written him off. We've always said, no, he's never going to make top 20, and then he did, and then never going to make top 10, and they did. And, like, surely it's beating top 20 players in high-profile matches that is going to change, you know, what we think of him.
Yeah, and he's got a few now, hasn't he? And beating Felix is a really good win.
He's now got 5 wins against top 10 players, 2 of which have come in 2022. Before the beginning of last year, he only had 1. And then he beat Thiem in Lyon, he beat Rublev in San Diego, beat Tsitsipas in Acapulco, and then beat Felix. He was 9 in the world last week in Los Cabos. I guess you would say that Felix is... it's not a bad matchup for Cam. You feel like that's someone he can outgrind quite comfortably.
Yeah, but he's a good player. You know, he's got weapons. There's no doubt. But clocking it down to another top 10 player that Felix can't beat.
Yeah, seems harsh, but and Norrie's not technically a top 10 player at the moment. I think
Is he not? Has he dropped out?
No, he's ranked 12 in the world, or at least he was last week. Oh, he's now back up to 10. There you go. Thanks to.
He's going to be dropping though, isn't he? Because his Indian Wells points are going to drop off after US Open, aren't
they? Yes, I suppose they will. They didn't drop off like 4 months after.
No, it's a calendar. It still goes on the calendar.
Right. Okay.
No, it goes on the calendar. So it's your tournaments don't actually they don't register tournaments. It's just the points you got in that week.
Right. Okay. So he currently has 2 sets of Indian Wells points on his. Right. Yeah. Okay.
Well, he might win the US Open.
That's actually a great point, Calvin. What if he wins the US Open? Then he
no.
won't.
But to be fair, he'd only have to because he's got those points. He's not going to like lose 1,000 points unless he loses first round. So he could easily say make semis, quarters, or semis in Indian Wells, and then he'll have made them up from however he did in Indian Wells early this year. So
true. I'm getting myself much more confused about rankings than I need to be. Coming up next, we're going to talk about the women's game. We'll talk about Osaka versus Gauff, Daria Kasatkina picking up a title, and we're also going to take your questions, I should say, from Terry White and Elena Tsourdi, so don't go anywhere. Welcome back to the Love Tennis Podcast with me, James Gray, George Belshaw and Calvin Betton. We're going to talk WTA next because there's been plenty of action on the women's side of the game, as there is over the next... In fact, as we speak, one of the bigger matches is going on right now because Serena Williams is in action in Toronto. Can't really talk about that too much because the match will be over by the time you hear this podcast and possibly by the time we actually finish recording it. But there was a big showdown at the Silicon Valley Classic, a real classic of a name there. Coco Gauff and Naomi Osaka in the second round. The kind of match that we hope we're going to see a lot of over the next 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years. Coco Gauff came through it 6-4, 6-4. She triumphed. Osaka was pretty pleased with what she did. She said she was pleased with her mental strength and how she's coped with preparing for this hard court swing. Gauff, meanwhile, a very decent win for her, another one to go on the record, obviously reaching the French Open final not that long ago. She got as far as the quarterfinal before losing to Paula Badosa. George, how do we assess this matchup at the moment? Gauff versus Osaka. They've played 5 times, I think, over the last 5 years, which I looked at that record and thought, oh, that's quite satisfying because, I think they had played every year. And then I realised they've only played 5 times in 5 years. Why are we not seeing these two play more?
Well, I mean, funnily enough, that sounds quite a lot to me for the the women's game at the minute. I mean, that of all the rivalries we probably want to see, that I think that would probably be up there in terms of the most played fixture, perhaps. That might, that I might be chatting complete nonsense there, but I'm struggling to think of two players I'm really interested in how their rivalries develop, who are playing each other regularly. I'm thinking Swiatek versus Osaka.
No, I think you're right. I think that's a reasonable point. I mean, like they had, in terms of actual times they've played, that probably is pretty decent. But it's just, I just find it disappointing that it hasn't happened more. Basically, it's they're two players we really want to see lots of in women's tennis. But anyway, we did get it, so there's no point in arguing about how much we might or might not. Was it a classic that we wanted it to be? I suppose the scoreline suggests not.
I think the interesting thing about this rivalry is, to me anyway, is that I kind of feel Gauff has Osaka's number. Now you might say that's because Osaka's not been playing as much in the recent times, and how big's the effect of that? But as Calvin would always tell us, if you've got a big serve and power hitting game like Osaka, you can beat anyone on your right day. And I think the broader point really is, and this is not maybe so much in the context of the rivalry, but Gauff is making the next step this season. She really is kind of starting to get a bit more of that consistency going. I think she's maybe 4 in the race at the minute. And yet doesn't necessarily feel like it's been a spectacular season. It feels very incremental to me. I think Calvin we need to check at some point our picks at the start of the year and where they're all up to now. But I think Calvin's got Gauff and picked her on the assumption she'd be a top 5 player by the end of the year. And that'd be a big incremental jump from somewhere between around 15 she probably was at the start of the year. And that is happening. That next step is happening. And now it feels to me that next year is probably the year we're going to be looking at Gauff and saying, right, you've got the platform now, the consistency of kind of the rigors of the tour, which again is something we've maybe said about Rybakina, who that's a learning step she's taking this year. Now, can you go and win slams? Can you win these big matches, these big events? At the minute, that's a good win against Osaka, but she needs that win in, slams.
Well, and she then goes and loses to Paula Badosa in the next round. So it's
but and this is the thing, and that's why I'm trying to frame it as unspectacular, but still the rankings, as we say, they don't lie. She is the 4th best player of the women's tour this year, and it doesn't feel to me that she's been as good as I thought, or as I think she can be. So it just feels like another good step, but that next greatness step that I think we're all expecting her to take hasn't quite been made for me just yet.
In terms of big steps, Naomi Osaka's had lots of big steps, forwards and backwards, in her career. She tweeted something a couple of days ago, which she subsequently deleted, which created quite a stir on social media. I mean, almost any time Naomi Osaka tweets, she creates some sort of stir, usually fairly positive. Here's what she tweeted. She said, "Sometimes I wish my parents were rich, so I don't have to feel like I need to work for everyone's survival." She followed that up with a sidebar. "I don't think I would be where I am if my parents were rich because I would have no motivation, so I guess everything happens for a reason." Calvin, I know you were quite exercised about this. I mean, what's your immediate reaction to it?
My first thought was that it comes back to what I find myself saying quite a bit, that this idea that rich people, in inverted commas, or I guess in this case, the children of rich people, are somehow less motivated than children who haven't had much when they grew up. And being that I'm from a working class background, so I'd like to think I'm pretty biased the other way, my experience within coaching and coaching players from both who've had difficult backgrounds and who haven't, is that that doesn't represent what I've experienced. There's no real correlation. Some people are just inherently motivated to succeed, and some aren't. I've coached kids from pretty rough backgrounds who have had zero motivation, and I've coached kids from pretty rough backgrounds who had a lot of motivation, and vice versa with the children of rich parents.
Is there any then common theme between the most motivated players or the most successful players when it comes to parentage? I mean, is there one thing that unites all of them?
I'd say the only thing that unites all of them, and is like we said in our WhatsApp group last night, or I said it, is you will not succeed in tennis unless you've got a very, very driven parent, at least one very, very driven parent.
Why is that? Is it just having someone who knows their way around the game or willing to...
It's not necessarily knowing yourself around the game. Look, you've got to do a lot. In tennis, you've got to do a lot of traveling.
Yeah.
Like, it's not like football where you can just find a field. There's fields everywhere in Great Britain or in anywhere. There's fields everywhere, except for maybe China. I don't know.
I can assure you there's a lot of fields in China.
Right, maybe not in the areas where people live, though.
Yeah, that's true.
So you've got to do a lot of traveling, and unless you're starting the game at 17, then you've got to get somebody to drive you there, and that means taking a lot of time off doing other things. But on top of that, kids need to be driven, not driven metaphorically in a car. They also need to be driven emotionally and motivationally by parents as well. They won't. Kids don't just decide on themselves that they want to be tennis players. It takes something, and then there'll be times within that journey that they're less motivated, that they'll want. I'm as competitive as anybody, and when I was growing up, there were times where I would have tennis training or tournaments, and would rather have gone to a party that some of my mates were having at school, and my parents had to go, no, we've put, and my parents, well, I wouldn't say they were massively driven in that respect, but their mentality was, look, if you're going to try and do this, you have to try and do it. And if you don't have parents who are driven by that, then you won't succeed. And I don't know whether I've told this story before on the podcast, but I coached a lad. I started coaching him when he was 6. This was about, I think he's 18 now. And he's a very, very talented boy at numerous sports, but particularly at tennis. He was a very good rugby player. And both his parents, where I'm getting to, one of his parents was a surgeon, the other parent was a GP. And so a very wealthy background. And he had 3 sisters who have all competed at, I think they've all played for Great Britain at netball. So they're a high achieving family. He loved this tennis, loved playing it, loved playing all his sports. His parents just weren't that bothered about tennis. And that was constantly a difficult situation, because at times where he was getting to the stage where he'd won a few tournaments around Leeds where he played, but and then when I'm saying, look, I think we should push on here, I think this is, you've got something here, they were perfectly fine with it. His dad really loved his rugby, and if that was the case, if you don't have a driven parent who's really into tennis, you won't succeed at it.
Probably is worth saying as well, we're talking about kind of family wealth going into it. The one thing that's often missing in tennis for a lot of families is the opportunity, and the money never stops you having the opportunity in tennis. It's expensive to be driven around, to have all the right equipment to go to tournaments and stuff. There are a lot of families who it's just not financially viable to kind of to gamble on that.
There is an element of that. I will say, just on that lad I just spoke about, I don't want to sound like a sob story. I think he's currently a very, very good rugby player, and I think he'll probably end up playing rugby for England. Right. It was just that tennis was the loser there. But on that, the other thing I'd say, I have a friend actually who coaches in London who doesn't really know the ins and outs of tennis like I do, and he's constantly on this battle, this idea that there's loads of unbelievably talented working class or lower tennis players around the country that are not getting the opportunity. What I will say about tennis, and this doesn't help the later developers, but in terms of the generational talents, if there is a generational talent who doesn't have the money, they'll find a way, because there will be somebody involved in tennis, particularly in Great Britain. I'm saying here, this is one of the things the LTA does. There's not going to be somebody tearing it up. There's not going to be a Roger Federer or Rafa Nadal tearing it up around the park courts of Brixton or something, and he's just left to rot there. Somebody will find him, and then his tennis will get paid for. Look at. I'll give you an example. Look at Paul Jupp. Paul Jubb's background was pretty bad. Was Jubby's, and he was a good tennis player. And
I mean, to fill people in, am I right saying Paul Jubb lost his parents quite young and grew up with his grandparents?
In
Hull, a lot
Hull,
of opportunity.
council estate in Hull, that kind of thing. But we found people in Yorkshire LTA. Myself, I was involved a little bit. We found a way, and he's now progressing. That kind of thing happens.
Yeah, fortunately.
Just to bring it back to Osaka's confidence, I mean, I don't want to dunk on her or anything, but the idea that also she has to keep playing tennis to kind of give her parents money now, it seems very odd to me. I mean, she made 50 million quid last year, didn't she? I mean, it still seems a bizarre, removed take from any closeness to reality.
Look, Naomi Osaka, I've seen a lot of comments, and some quite mean-spirited, but some kind of generously spirited as well. I read one on Reddit that just said she really she really is tweeting anything these days, just using Twitter like a journal and setting herself up. And I thought that was a pretty good way of kind of describing it. It's like, I don't know if you've ever gone back, George, and looked at your old Facebook from when you were 16 and you would just post whatever came into your head, you just put it on there as though people cared. And I guess actually with Naomi Osaka people do care, but with no filter. And she literally tweeted 4 days ago, "I'm always on the verge of saying something wild." Well, sometimes you need to stay on the verge and not stray over it. And it's depressing, and that's the world we live in. But 30 years ago, if you wanted to say something stupid to your mates, you rang them up or you went to a party. If you wanted everyone to see it or hear it, you had to find a journalist, tell it to them, get them to put it in the newspaper, or go on TV or go on the radio. You couldn't just sit in your bedroom at 2 a.m. and say something stupid to 5 million people. And I just think, I don't want to tell Naomi Osaka how to live her life, but come on, have some sense.
I mean, what I would say on that though, James, and I don't necessarily agree with what she said there, but I don't mind her doing it. We're here talking about it. People are talking about it. It's better than the social media accounts that are just run by the management companies, and where all we get every day is tough loss today, back to work tomorrow.
Riley Opelka was very funny on that this week. I mean, Riley Opelka, I very rarely agree with Riley Opelka, let's face it. But he did make me laugh this week when he was like, "Why do tennis players have to post a picture after every match?" And I was like, yeah, I mean, fair point.
Yeah.
And then he's been getting trolled by this sort of slightly odd guy called Harry Rosen, and he's now changed his profile picture to the picture of Harry Rosen, which I think is a bit mean, but
But we get, at least with Osaka, we get a glimpse of, it's her personality, isn't it?
Yeah.
We get that. We know one thing we know it's her tweeting.
Yeah, agreed.
I think if you were part of a management team, you'd be pulling your bloody hair out at that tweet, because she is trying to hit quite a socially conscious crowd, and she's just come across as incredibly obtuse there and not in touch with reality.
The management companies, and I know this through my mates who work in that realm, they shit themselves over anything. They don't want any sign of, they don't want any sort of 1% of personality coming in.
Yeah. And of course, she runs her own management company now. Just to be clear, I appreciate that other people will do the strategizing, but I don't know. Maybe this is the future now. We're going to see more and more players running their own management companies. Federer started that, and obviously Osaka's doing it. We've seen Rock Nation. They put a lot more power in the hands of players, or at least they say they do. Although I appreciate that's a little bit of smoke and mirrors going on there. With people like Rashford. But I do wonder whether maybe we've come full circle. Social media was the Wild West and players said loads of stupid stuff. And then we had agents and management companies getting hold of them and saying, all right, we need to rein all this in and have people do it for you. And maybe this is the new, it's like serve and volley. It comes in, it comes out, it goes in, it goes out. And you're just trying to go against the grain. Sorry, George, before you...
So it's just like Calvin's theory of doubles changing in terms of people staying back.
Yeah.
It's like is it a stupid you stay back and say nothing, or get rushed to the net and just write?
Well, I'll tell you what, Naomi Osaka is firmly on top of the net, I can tell you that much, in terms of going against the trend.
Not as closely as Tsitsipas, perhaps.
No. let's take some listener questions. First of all, from Terry White on Twitter. What do you think about not allowing second serves? Too many serve bots in the game. Has this been tried before? In talking about the men's game, at least, in terms of serve botting. Calvin, no second serves. Ever thought about it?
I mean, I coach a 6'6" left-hander, so talking about neutralising serve, I'm probably not the best person to ask about that. But, look, I saw that, and it's been the idea has been banded around a bit. Maybe around about 96, 97, it's banded about quite a bit. I'm not sure. Are there too many serve bots around now? There's maybe what, 5 or 6 in the top 100.
It's funny in terms of trialing it. That I think I'm right in saying the next gen finals, they were heavily considering that, and people like Craig Tiley and co were doing kind of consultations with players and stuff, and that one came back. In fact, the other one they did want to try was the no let rule, so you just play on from the let, and they were like, well, we think this will speed up the game and make it more. Players hated it, so there's from a player power perspective, they hated that idea in consultation.
So the one thing I always hear from players, like I seem to when you get those little pre-tournament videos when they ask them like 10 quick questions, it's like, if you could change one rule, I feel like a lot of players say the let rule. Like maybe it's one that splits the room. But Calvin, I mean, we were talking about it over the summer a lot because the nets are looser on grass, so you get more of them. But
I don't like the no let rule. It brings too much luck into it for my liking. And it just you don't get many lets. It's not slowing it down. How much time would you save on a tennis match for no lets? Total of about what, 3 minutes
max?
Yeah.
Exactly.
I did in terms of serving, I wouldn't take away second serve. I think, they're two different. It's a skill, first serve and second serve. I think what you'd end up getting then is too many breaks. And I think matches would actually end up lasting longer.
Yeah, that's
a
great point, actually.
What I think might be trialed and which would lead to more likelihood of breaking serve, although I think the numbers are pretty good now, to be honest. In terms of how many breaks you have, is you could bring sudden death juice in, and that it's easier to, if it's sudden death juice, it's easier to win 1 point against a serve bot than 2.
Who is the player that would benefit most from no first serve or no second serve?
Well, Diego Schwartzman, I think, is like the best second serve player on tour. So, but he's also the best. He's also the best returner of serve on tour.
Do you think? So returns at Curios again. Would he just? It seems to me he just hit his first serve anyway. The majority of the time.
Well, that's another point. That's another point. Would there then be too many points where I'm not sure that would bring loads of viewers in if people
the ball just not in play.
Just not going in play enough.
I think
not everyone would do that, of course. I suppose
not everyone would, but I think more players would.
It would be really interesting from a perspective of sport evolution and in the same way that the 100 in cricket, I was reading an interview in the Eye actually with Cat Lucas with Matt Parkinson, the leg spinner, and he said that in the first 100 game they came off after one innings, which for people who don't know cricket was basically an innovative format of the game that no one had ever played before. That's now a big deal in England, and they came off the pitch afterwards and they didn't know if they'd done a good job or not because the game was only half done. They were like, we have no idea if that's a good score or not. And I would quite enjoy that kind of player, the game evolving. I like it when sports evolve.
I think I agree on that respect, James, but I think what you're doing there, especially with all the different formats of cricket, which we always talk about, is you're just changing the scoring system. Yeah. You're not changing the actual rules of the game, which is what we're talking about with removing the second.
But I'm so pro tennis, taking the approach that snooker takes, which is different tournaments have different rules, because as you say, first taking away second serve isn't changing the game. You're not introducing a new skill. You're not putting a second ball on the court. You're effectively just changing the scoring system. So I would just like to change the scoring system.
I think first and second serves are. As I've said before, I would be up for doing some different scoring systems. And my mate said to me the other day, "Do I think eventually that we'll do away with final sets and just have a tiebreak?" And I do. I don't like it, but I think we will eventually end up doing that.
I think that's McEnroe's idea: is to 2 sets all in a slam.
It's even I think even in normal events at one set all, because one of the things that often gets labelled at tennis, why it's difficult as a sport to put on TV, is you don't know how long matches will last. And as you find with doubles, what happens with doubles with and it would only be the same for singles with sudden death deuce and tiebreak third, is that each match, unless somebody gets absolutely cuffed, in which case it's shorter, each match lasts round about an hour and 15. Because if you get a 6-4, 6-4, that's about an hour and 15. If you get 6-3, 3-6, 10-8, that's about an hour and 15.
Yeah.
And it's worth saying, isn't it, that change by and large has happened in the grassroots game. I mean, most matches people just play a championship tiebreak as a third set now. That's pretty standard practice.
I don't like it. I'll tell you why I don't like it, is because it suits the person who's losing.
Yeah.
Because at the start of a tennis match, you have to win 2 sets to win the match. And if you lose the first set, you just have to win 1 set and a tiebreak. So you're actually closer to winning the match after losing a set than you are before anybody's won a set.
It's funny you say that, Calvin, because that is exactly how I feel about it. And there's so many bloody matches I can think of where I'd demolish someone in the first set, they claw their way back in, and then I'm like, I really just want the third set, reset, get back into it, and then it's bloody over 2 minutes later. It's like, well, it's just annoying.
My feeling has always been, I don't have any definitive stats on this, that the player who, I think it's a bit different in doubles because there's 2 players, so you can calm each other. The player who wins the second set is more likely to win the tiebreak.
Yeah. I can sort of say that's happened in my experience, but I've got a bit of a head loss in me, so that's probably fair enough.
Right, let's move on. We've got another listener question. We're running out of time very rapidly, so we're going to do this, and then we might have to talk about paddle next week, Calvin, I'm afraid. I know you were really geared up for that, but we'll just have to... Maybe we'll do an extra podcast, just a paddle pod, the Love Paddle podcast.
We can get a bit in today. We've still got a bit of time.
Paddle and pickleball. Don't forget pickleball. That's...
Yes, don't forget pickleball. Elena Tsourdi, one of our very loyal listeners and a good friend on Twitter, says, what do you make of last week's performance of Iga Swiatek? Cause for worry or loss as part of the game? What would be the issues in need of improvement? Iga's second serve was dismantled by Carolina Garcia. I know, Elena, you asked about Carlos Alcaraz as well, but that might be too big a can of worms to get into this week. Iga Swiatek, of course, was beaten on home soil in the Poland Open by Carolina Garcia, who's incidentally having a cracking summer, as we all know. The big serving French player is great to watch. I really enjoyed watching her at Wimbledon, and she got to the semis in Lausanne, she got to the quarters in Palermo, and then she won the title in Poland. George, much cause for concern that someone's found a way to beat Iga Swiatek?
I view this through the prism of the anti-Andy Murray French relationship. So Murray famously just always beat French players early in his career. And Swiatek's lost her last 2 matches to the Frenchies. So I'm wondering if that's going to be a hot new streak of nationality that we weren't aware would start popping up. But no, in all seriousness, I'm not worried. But it doesn't take long to prick these airs of invincibility. And Swiatek had a massive one, and it works from both sides of the net. You know, your opponent suddenly believes you are beatable, and you suddenly start feeling more vulnerable. Garcia's had quite an interesting year, I'd say. She's won a lot of quite good matches at times. I don't think I'm looking at this result like that's a disaster. And Cornet, you know, has actually done quite well at the slams as well this year. She did okay at the French. She's done okay at Wimbledon. So it's not like you're losing to completely terrible players who've got nothing about them. It's just that fall from grace is strong, but you know, it's gone from being someone who looked untouchable to, you know, slightly more vulnerable. I do wonder with Swiatek slightly, and this might be a really unfair characterization, I wonder if a lack of rival might harm her a little bit over the next couple of years until someone like Gauff gets up to that point. It feels to me that some of the best players out there, you know, we spoke about McEnroe's documentary the other week, it was having those players around them, Borg, you know, Connors to a degree, Lendl, who then were pushing you up to the next level. And once Borg went out, a lot of McEnroe's excitement went. And, you know, you talk about the big four, big three, they always say the reason I got to where I did was having these other people trying to push me and kind of knowing I had to be better than them. I don't think Swiatek's got that at the minute, and that might be unfair, but I think it's just one to kind of keep in mind for some of these top players. They really are motivated by who else is near me, and if they're not really pushing that rivalry, that could potentially affect them mentally. But Calvin, what do you think of that theory of a rival? Is that something that could hurt Swiatek, or do you think that's
No, I don't read too much into it. She's going to lose tennis matches. It happens all the time. I think now as well, she's focusing on the big tournaments. I think, she would like to win in Poland. It's her hometown, but I think we'll see her. She's still a very, very strong favourite for the US Open, I'd say.
Yeah, fair enough. I think I'm probably clutching at straws to find a narrative with Swiatek. But more broadly, is there something in not having? Could it harm her in the long run not having someone getting close to week in, week out, or not really? Or is it just?
It comes back to one of my favourite analogies. The summer when Agassi won everything in the US Opens, US summer. Sorry, he won all the tournaments he played. In just battering everybody, and then he came up against Sampras in I think the semis of the US Open, and he lost the match. And he said afterwards that he'd forgotten how to play when losing, and it was a different type of sort of a battle that he had to fight, and he just didn't know how to fight it because he'd just been winning all the time. And I think that's probably more of a threat to Swiatek than anything else.
It was also a very good week for Daria Kasatkina. She is now third in the WTA race, which I won't lie, did slightly sneak up on me. I kind of thought she's been having an okay year, but to kind of pull ahead of Gauff, I guess that kind of ties into what I was saying earlier about Gauff, really, is that it doesn't feel to me like she's made, I know she's been to the first Grand Slam final, but it doesn't feel to me like she's taken a massive step to be top four, just been slightly more consistent than the rest of the field. But well done to her. A pretty impressive week. Rybakina, first round win. Taylor Townsend, who we know it can be a really tricky opponent, a lot of serving involving. Sabalenka, Badosa, and then Shelby Rogers in the final. That's a pretty good win for a player who kind of was up and coming in 2019, I would say. She kind of cracked into the top 10 and then really dipped. But she's got an interesting game, doesn't she? A lot of slice and stuff.
Yeah. No, I think, she's a good player. Don't know how good she'll end up being, but what her ceiling is and that kind of thing. But she's a very good player.
She's 25 now. Quite interestingly about her matches, looking at the scores in front of me, first 3 rounds, final set finished with a bagel. Is that common that you just start bageling? I guess we had Swiatek doing that almost every week earlier in the year, but that is quite unusual, isn't it?
I mean, it's something that players who are relentless, they can do, and that's it's a bit odd how regularly it happened there, but it's pretty ruthless competitiveness, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Well done to her. We also had Maria Sakkari kind of opening up about her struggles, and I guess this probably does chime into some of the stuff we've been talking about the women's game over the last few years, of this real pressure to get up to a high ranking and then feeling like you're struggling and not enjoying it. What did you make of her comments? And she kind of was saying by the end, I feel we'll see a different Maria coming back now. But it has been a classic case of someone gets high up the greasy pole and it's harder to stay there, I suppose.
Yeah, true. I mean, I saw quite a bit of Sakkari over the summer because she was at a few of the tournaments that I was, and she never looked particularly happy, sort of wandering around the players area and that kind of thing. So it doesn't surprise me that she's come out and said that. Hopefully she's, can get in a better headspace and get back to winning ways. Yeah,
absolutely. Right. The chat you've really wanted there, and I can tell your enthusiasm.
James oversold it somewhat.
Flying out your pores. This is quite funny timing for this to pop up, because I'm currently midway through writing a script on pickleball and its the concerns over its domination in the USA. So I've been reading about this a lot this week. I have to say, my knowledge of pickleball wasn't great before this. This does feel a lot more of a problem in the States, but I suppose we've got Padel here that's maybe taken off as well. I'll ask you a few different questions because I think there's a few different angles to this.
Okay.
Obviously, this weekend, there's been the context that the Washington final wasn't being shown on TV because they were playing some pickleball on TV. There's not been masses of examples of that, I don't think, really. But that is a sign that there is perhaps more of an existential threat than maybe others have been credit for. Because normally we're talking about you can play, so for context for people who don't know it, you can get 4 pickleball courts or padel courts to 1 tennis court in terms of size. So there's a lot of courts being built over in the US, and it's becoming quite... There's loads of articles of people like actually ending up fighting on these park courts and stuff, which is mildly amusing.
You wouldn't get 4 paddle courts on a tennis.
Not 4. Sorry, 4 pickleball. Is it 2 paddle courts to 1?
I would think maybe 1 and a bit. I'd say in terms of paddle.
Yeah,
because you've got to have walls and that kind of thing. So
yeah. But I suppose they are smaller, and that is always the argument, isn't it? We need more space to get people involved, and not. There are people who would say, "Oh, these are just gateway sports into tennis, and it's good to kind of have different options." Which camp are you in, and how worried are you about the future of tennis amid these weird racket threats?
It's not that I'm worried. That's not my concern, and it's not like James made out there that I hate paddle. I've never played pickleball. It's not really very big over here, but I know it's out there. But I'll talk about that with the pickleball in a minute. It's not that I don't see paddle as a threat or anything like that. And I quite enjoy. I've never played it, but it's something I'd quite like to play. Again, there's not many courts around, especially where I live. I think the nearest court to me is about 30 miles away. But what I don't get, and the gripe that James the other day, particularly the gripe that James was picking out on me, is something I tweeted the other day, that I don't get why the LTA are streaming paddle matches on their platform. It's not tennis. It's a completely different sport. And they've bought it, and they've now put 4 courts up at the National Tennis Centre. They're now running coach education classes for it. If they're going to do it, if they wanted to own it as a money-making thing, I don't know why they didn't set up a different company for it, because it's not tennis. It's like you wouldn't do this for badminton or squash or table tennis. And there it relates no more to the game of tennis than any of those things that I've just suggested. Are they different sports? And so I don't get why they're spending money on it, and I don't get why they are streaming it on their streaming platform. Especially seen as I think there were tennis tournaments going off over the weekend. There was British Tour going off. They're not streaming those things, and they could if they wanted to. This is the biggest British tour of the year going on at Sutton this week. There won't be no streaming on the LTA website. Now, the pickleball thing that the Washington final wasn't on because Tennis Channel was showing that's different because Tennis Channel isn't a governing body. To a degree, they can show whatever they want. I guess they're going to show whatever brings in the most viewers. And I don't know about the rights for Washington, the final, and that kind of thing. So,
would you be shocked to think pickleball would bring in more viewers than a Nick Kyrgios final?
Yeah, I would, which makes me think that maybe they didn't have the rights. Otherwise, somebody's made a weird decision there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say so. Maybe it should be a wake up for tennis, though. But they need to start bringing more viewers in.
Well, it's true, and it's always it's funny reading. I've obviously done a fair amount of extensive reading on this, but you do get some. You got to take a lot of things with a pinch of salt. People kind of see their own experiences and don't necessarily then see what's going on. But the facts also are, they're there with pickleball in the States. They've grown something like from 2 million players to 4.5 million over a 5-year period. That's really rapid growth. And they've got tournaments that are paying people up to £80,000 to win. Let's be honest, a really fringe, weird sport in many ways. Talking about being started in the 60s by it was actually a Republican congressman. I don't know if you know that, Calvin, who was trying to entertain his kids in the afternoon and just had
maybe
equipment.
Whoever is promoting it, tennis should look at finding the people who do that. I've said this for many years now, that if darts can become as huge as it has done, then I don't on TV as a sport. I don't get why tennis can't do the same. But tennis continues to shoot itself in the foot by making, frankly, ludicrous decisions, such as putting it on Amazon Prime, where you're going to lose all of your, not just the channel flicking viewership, but it's just a nightmare to get on. I wanted to watch Raducanu the other day, and I bear in mind I use Amazon fairly regularly. And I'm relatively tech savvy. It must have taken me 15 minutes for various reasons to get the Raducanu match on, just through Prime taking ages to load up on my TV, and then for some reason it wasn't on the initial menu. You had to really search for it, and that doesn't help matters. I think if it was on Sky Sports, I could have pressed 401 and the tennis would have been on.
I think we're probably touching into just a broad point of tennis, isn't it? That there's very few people pulling in the same direction together at the same time. It's always very individualistic, short-term views.
And I think that's what it is. And I'm sure that Amazon paid a bit more money than the next platform did, but they'd have got a little bit more money, but I doubt they're paying a fortune for it. So it'd been a little bit more money, but then tennis is losing all of its viewership. Not all of it. It's losing a huge chunk of viewership. To the extent now, George, where if tennis was on Sky, I'd have it on all the time because that's what I do. I'd just put it on and whatever I'm doing, I'd have it on in the background. Now, I'll only go on Amazon to watch a particular match if I want to watch it because it's just a nightmare to navigate that sort of thing.
Well, let's hope our podcast keeps its viewership, and we're desperately close to being out of time. So, Calvin, I'm going to bid you farewell. It's been a pleasure as always, and leave us a nice review.
Sports Social Podcast Network.